Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
20 states have passed pro-industrial hemp legislation. And more telling, 10 states, including Oregon, have passed legislation that remove barriers to its production. Let me read them. California, Colorado, Kentucky, Maine, Montana, North Dakota, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and West Virginia. Pretty wide range of states all across the country. Now, as I think most of you know, hemp products are perfectly legal today. There is a retail market in hemp products we think is about $500 million now. I frankly think that's understated. We've watched the estimates since I've been working on this. The estimates kind of go up about the range of the market. And I will tell you that I'm convinced if we're able to move forward with actual hemp cultivation in Oregon and other states, I think that market is going to expand. The hemp, there'll be more competition for it, and it can be grown locally, not imported from Europe or Canada or Kamchatka or someplace. So the supply line is shorter and the competition is greater. So I think that means that it's going to have overall an opportunity to make hemp products even more competitive than they are now. Additionally, it's going to, I think the attention that is going to be directed as a result of what's going on in Oregon and other states, we're going to watch the expansion. So I think there will be more attention, more involvement, and I think you're going to see even more commercial application. So from my point of view, it's gone from less than $1/3 billion to $500 million, and I think it's going to expand dramatically. You see some of the products out there. This is a hemp flag. Gerald Polis and I arranged for it to be flown over the United States Capitol on July 4th. You know, it's important to clear up the misconceptions. Industrial hemp. Now, why don't you repeat after me? Industrial hemp is not marijuana, right? You ought to practice that in other groups. You know, it's really frustrating. There's less than 0.3% of THC. It's not a drug. Now, we can argue about outdated drug laws anyway. I mean, is marijuana really worse than heroin and meth? But that's a debate for another day. We don't need to get into it. I don't want to get into it. I want to focus on hemp. Regardless of your view about other drug laws, this is not a drug. And we need to come together to help people understand that and what the opportunities are. I've been listening to people who've been cornering me for decades. Some of you have been stalking me in this room. But the point has been well taken. And so we've been working as part of a whole range of issues in Congress to get this thing off the table, get it passed, get it accepted. Now, part of what's interesting for me is that the controversy surrounding marijuana is going to help us sweep through some of the misconceptions. As you know, 21 states and the District of Columbia have legalized medical marijuana. Over 110 million people live in states that have medical marijuana where it's legal. And this fall, 2 states Washington and Colorado voted to legalize adult recreational use of marijuana. What happened is this has set up an interesting conflict with federal law. And again, not debating the merits one way or another, that's an issue. But President Obama famously said, when challenged, is the Department of Justice going to be prosecuting Colorado officials for doing what they're required to do in the state constitution, which over 55% of the people told them to do? And the president said that he had bigger fish to fry. And that's true. And so we had the statement from the administration, which was logical and a way to avoid an unfortunate conflict between the state and federal authorities. We do have bigger fish to fry. The problem was that there were 83 independent U.S. attorneys who were frying those smaller fish. So we sought and obtained clarification from the Department of Justice that they would not essentially be prosecuting people who were operating under the color of state law, and set up some conditions whereby that would be respected. Well, this helps us even more, because if you can have a regimen in these states where medical or recreational marijuana is legal, and you can do this to the satisfaction of the Department of Justice, it ought to be a no-brainer to set up a system whereby hemp meets that criteria and would not be prosecuted. It's very, for me, exciting to have that guidance from the U.S. Attorney laying out the priorities, but even more important for us in Oregon, the U.S. Attorney Amanda Marshall has stated that her position will be to rely on state and local authorities to address localized activities. And in a recent letter, and we've made copies, I think, from U.S. Attorney Marshall, the department expects that states which legalize cultivation or use of cannabis, whether for industrial purposes, medical purposes, or otherwise, will establish and enforce strict regulatory schemes that protect the 8 federal interests that are identified. They will take a trust but verify approach. And as long as the state follows through in imposing those controls, it's not likely that they will be, there will be any threatened federal action will be less necessary. Look at the actual language, but the point is, if that's the case for marijuana, it certainly informs the guidance for hemp. So it ought to be easier, more direct, and virtually no reason that there would be any involvement. And it's important for us to give clarification to the men and women who may decide to be involved, that they're not going to be interfered with. And I hope that it gives the assurance to the state. The state has been extraordinarily, I think, forthcoming on this with the Department of Agriculture and the state legislature. So we're, I think, well positioned, and we'll actually have an opportunity to hear from a representative from the State Department of Agriculture today. Now, you may have noticed the last few months have not necessarily been the shining moments for the United States Congress. There have been some controversies and some dysfunction. But for me, one of the highlights in a really miserable period was watching in this Congress moments of bipartisanship around the hemp issue. During the Farm Bill debate, together with a colleague from Colorado, Jared Polis, and one from Kentucky, Thomas Massey, a Republican from Kentucky, who has agreed to be our lead with the legislation in Congress. We offered what we thought was sort of a simple, common sense amendment. And that's always a danger sign in Congress, because those are the first to lose. that would allow colleges and universities to grow and cultivate hemp for academic and agricultural research purposes. And it passed. It passed with bipartisan support. I think it was 225 votes. And that provision is still on the table for the Farm Bill discussion we have now. And we're working for the conference committee, and some of the stuff that's going to be in the bill makes me cringe. I don't know that I'm going to be able to vote for it. But I think we're going to be able to keep this provision and be able to do something else that's very important. It's not just to give a clear signal to Oregon agriculture that it is appropriate for them to go forward if they cultivate it as they see fit. It's important to help them cultivate it. And for us to be able to do the research that OSU is capable of doing, they do amazing things there to help other Oregon industries, from the cheese makers, people who brew beer, wine, small fruits and vegetables, their forestry. I mean, they are not just American experts, they're global experts at OSU. Tremendously powerful research capacity. And now they might be able to do research on hemp in terms of how to grow it and product applications. That is a part of establishing a new element for Oregon industry. We're about to hear from an all-star panel. I think I've stalled long enough. I think we've got everybody here who's going to be here. Although, thank you, Cable Access, for being here. When you're on your exercise machine at 2 in the morning and just don't quite know what to do, and you're tired of watching speeches on the floor of the House on C-SPAN reruns, you'll be able to watch this and listen from our experts. I did want to acknowledge how helpful the Department of Agriculture's Katie Koba has been. She's the director, in talking through with her the nature of this federal partnership. Whole Foods, a leader in adapting alternative products to retail markets and helping them become more mainstream. Thank you. Hearing from Rick Rutherford, an Oregon farmer I just met for the first time from Dufur, who's interested in doing a deep dive in cultivating hemp. Well, I think the stakes are high for Oregon. We want to be able to strengthen our economy, particularly what happens in rural and small town Oregon. Being able to have one more product that they can cultivate that has a number of applications, I think is a step towards helping the economy in an area that's been battered by the recession. And as we research, grow, and be able to have access to hemp, I think it's also going to help small entrepreneurs. I mean, people who have ideas for hemp products that can be more affordable and accessible. So I think it's going to unleash other areas of economic activity. Because this is part of an effort that we need to do here. We want to support and encourage this process being set up with the state of Oregon, the Department of Agriculture. We want to learn from one another, and we want to inform the public so we can lay the foundation. I would like Oregon to be a leader as we move to the point where it is clearly going to be authorized under federal statute, and we are doing more for research and product development. But Oregon, once again, is poised to be a real
Mr. Henry Ford in 1941 with Popular Mechanics magazine showing off his car made from hemp.
Well, come climb the mountain with me. Come come see what we can see. Come climb the mountain with me, and then we will all be free. Some men are born to lead, some men have destiny. Some men plant the seed, and some men set it free.
Here we had 92,000 cars a day, thousands of people parking behind the FBI building, and they arrested us and they said, you cannot do this. I said, well, I'm not going to pay you a fine and go on probation. So I did 15 days in prison rather than give them a $5 fine.
Wow,
You know, we had
that's kind of like telling Jesus you can't practice on Sunday.
it was a fine line.
So come climb the mountain with me, come see what we can see. Come climb the mountain with me, and then we will all be free.
Jack here and Ed Adair.
Well, hi, guys.
They must be on the hemp tour. Are you on the hemp tour?
One man said we must
We've got
hear.
that.
One man's voice was clear. One man heard the call. His vision speaks for all.
The number one plant for paper, fiber, and fuel from the natural cycle had been outlawed. That somehow the synthetic cycle had won, when the number one thing in the natural cycle could outproduce it and completely clean up the atmosphere. So my partner, Captain Ed, who had become my partner in 1973 and doing the politics of this, said, we have to teach everybody in the world. So we went around and told everybody. Yeah. But it was a slow process.
So come open your eyes with me and come see what you can see. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. Come open your eyes with me. It's time for you to see. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. It's time for the world to know the emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes. The emperor wears no clothes.
Last night, as soon as we knew the two teams that were headed to the Super Bowl, the headline all over social media was it would be the first Super Bowl among teams from states that had voted to legalize recreational use of marijuana, in this case, Washington State and Colorado. It has been slowly trending that way in some places, and because it's been in the news, the New Yorker magazine asked President Obama about it during an interview, and his answer on it is making news. Our report tonight from our chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd.
Legalization of marijuana in Colorado and Washington is sparking a national debate.
People like me, just regular everyday moms, probably will give it a try.
And now even the president has weighed in, telling the New Yorker magazine, I don't think it is more dangerous than alcohol. But the president is not exactly condoning its use either, even though he's tried it. Here's how he views it: as a bad habit and a vice, not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life. But as a father, the president has his limits. And I've told my daughters, I think it's a bad idea, a waste of time, not very healthy. But Mr. Obama's live and let live attitude is in stark contrast to past White House positions on the drug.
Who's talking about Mrs. Reagan?
In the 80s, Nancy Reagan appeared in a popular sitcom to boost her Just Say No campaign.
I'm concerned about drug abuse, especially among the young.
Later in that decade, marijuana use torpedoed one of Ronald Reagan's Supreme Court picks, Douglas Ginsburg. By the early 90s, as the baby boomers started to come of age, admitting to smoking a joint didn't necessarily snuff out someone's political future.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale.
It's been a long journey. In 1969, 84% of Americans were against legalization of marijuana. Today, 58% are in favor, and the president may have just helped that number grow.
And a president says marijuana is no more dangerous than alcohol, that's going to affect a lot of people, could change history.
But General Barry McCaffrey, who ran the Clinton White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, says legalization is a bad idea.
Early onset exposure to marijuana, to ecstasy, to beer consumption is the pathway to a lifetime of addiction.
The question now, how will the president's comments impact the debate? Chuck Todd, NBC News, Washington.
I'm Scott Hoagland. This is Planet Hemp. I was sitting in a Motel 6 and the Bible was there on the shelf, so I decided to pick it up and read a verse. Well, according to Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, God gave every man every herb bearing its seed, which is on the earth. Well, this plant I have which bears its seed ended me up in a jail, and they took my herb away and threw me in a cage. Well, that makes me ask the question, who are the...
Throughout this program, you will learn how one of the world's oldest cultivated crops can play a major role in dealing with some of today's environmental struggles, as well as increasing the wealth, economy, and well-being of its population.
Gotta stick together and tell them this shit ain't right. Learn first and then decide.
Allow me to introduce Dr. Tom Maloney.
Research, hemp goes back a long ways for being used by man.
Dr. Maloney is the head of the Wood Materials and Engineering Department at the Washington State University. It is in his laboratories that he and his associates test building products manufactured from hemp. Next, I'd like you to meet Ken Friedman, president of American Hemp Mercantile in Seattle, Washington. Ken imports and sells goods made from hemp, including paper, fabric, food, even furniture. And this is Paul Stanford, president of Tree Free Eco Paper in Portland, Oregon. Paul sells the many paper products that can be made from hemp, from envelopes to letterhead to corrugated boxes to computer paper.
Well, our paper is made from non-wood fiber, primarily hemp.
But first, let's clear the air of a few misconceptions. Hemp and marijuana are often referred to as the same substance, but this is untrue.
Hemp is a plant that grows over most of the world. Its Latin name is Cannabis sativa. It is the same plant that marijuana comes from, but it's grown differently, and they hybrid it so it's very low in THC.
If you were to think of an apple tree, hemp would be the tree itself, the bark, the roots, the stems, the leaves, the whole tree. Marijuana would then be the fruit of the tree, or the apples.
Hemp is a crop that grows annually. It grows relatively rapidly, depending on location. In Pacific Northwest, from what I understand, is a good location for growing the hemp plant. You can get a lot of material grown annually. You can grow it on land that might not be good for forest.
Perhaps the biggest hurdle tripping the hemp industry is the mistaken idea that when hemp is grown, marijuana is always produced.
What a lot of people get confused about, what is hemp and what's marijuana, and I think in other parts of your program you're discussing that, but they're quite different. I always tell people, I say, well, what is hemp? I say, well, just think about hemp rope. That's the hemp that you're really familiar with.
Marijuana is only grown on female plants. If male plants are grown, only industry-usable material is produced. Besides growing only male plants, science has created a genetic hybrid that produces no marijuana whatsoever.
Well, non-industrial hemp would be illegal marijuana, the things that's being grown in people's basements or imported from Thailand. Industrial hemp is a different hybrid. It's grown differently. It's grown for the stalk. All the fibers come from the stalk, so they grow it close together. They don't grow it for the leaves or the buds.
It's the same plant, but the plant that produces the best and most fiber doesn't produce the psychoactive substance in any quantities that are useful for drug production.
They've been doing it for generations in Western Europe and for centuries in Eastern Europe. In fact, in the United States, we had industrial hemp until 1937.
Scientists have dated hemp use back 12,000 years. It is known to be one of the first 4 cultivated crops.
12,000 years ago, hemp was one of the first crops that was purposely cultivated by human beings in the first agricultural settlements that sprung up in the Tigris-Euphrates valleys and in the Yellow River Valley.
Sailing ships used hemp to make the sailcloth, and hemp's been used in making paper for centuries and centuries.
This one plant was used to make the paper that Bibles and even the Declaration of Independence were printed on. Hemp has been woven into garments throughout history and across the world. Not only was the very first American flag sewn by Betsy Ross made from hemp, but so were the clothes and supplies of the many soldiers that fought to keep her waving.
It was illegal not to grow hemp in some of the British colonies because they needed it for their sails and their ropes, and they needed enough of a production to satisfy the Navy.
But more recently, in the 1940s, when the United States was at war in the Pacific and many of our supplies were cut off, the United States government produced a video called Hemp for Victory. This video was to encourage farmers to grow hemp for the war effort.
American hemp must meet the needs of our Army and Navy as well as of our industries. In 1942, patriotic farmers at the government's request planted 36,000 acres of seed hemp, an increase of several thousand %. The goal for 1943 is 50,000.